Okay, so this is Anthony's, Gary's, and Thomas's final presentation. This is the start of Gary's section. The high yield but fragile system. We have evolved our food supply reduction to a high yield but fragile system. Most food producers are limited to one large industry supplier, Monsanto, for their seeds and genetic engineering. With that, there is little genetic diversity within our food production. Crop growers have little choice but to use Monsanto products to make yields the land they must use. Who is impacted by this, you might ask? Every living thing, small businesses, food suppliers. Were the trade offs or the Fawcett bargains? Increased food supply yields, more drought tolerant and pest resistant crops, less genetically diverse crops, limited producers, and unknown health and environmental effects. What are some of the hidden features with ethical implications, some conceptual muddles? Increasing population, increased demands on food supply with less ability for other companies to compete. Is there a policy vacuum? There are high-powered, well-financed governing agencies hold the coded material, limited policy representation for the smaller growers. Smaller growers do not have the same resources and representation to compete, which is one of the biggest problems concerning genetic engineering when it comes to food. If you apply the utilitarian framework, if we apply a starting framework as the world changes, so does the way we process our food supply. Throughout the generation, crops have been adjusted to favor the strongest attributes for the climate they're in. The specialization of one company to create genetically stronger crops is of a benefit to the world's food supply. In contrast, there is less competition in these spaces, leading to less diversity in the crops and possible greater change of a cascading failure. This is a high degree of change to affect the world's population. This is the start of Anthony's section. Analyzing the food supply chain. The primary goal of the food supply chain is a very complex but very necessary logistics program our world needs. To analyze the ethical problems that occur within this field, I will use deontology. One of the primary duties of information technology in the space of the food supply chain is food shipping traceability. Ethical problems that arise. One of the potential problems that can arise is food fraud, which basically means counterfeit food products can be shipped or food shipping can be used as a means of moving other legal products, such as drugs, moved in from other countries. Analyzing using deontology. In the grand scheme of things, the average person doesn't have the choice when it comes to choosing whether or not they want their food to be handled and moved because it's the food supply chain. It's a necessary function for most members of society to use as a means to live. The people that can more than likely get away with using or without using the food supply chain are people who grow their own crops and farmers who source their own food and grow and raise their own animals and stuff. This is the start of Tom's section. Who owns self-replicating technology? The Monsanto Corporation has launched thousands of lawsuits costing farmers millions of dollars on the basis of patented seeds. It is estimated that 90% or more of staple food crops such as corn and soybeans are legally owned and at least in part by Monsanto, despite the fact that Monsanto never planted them. After developing seeds which yield greater harvests and selling those seeds, the patent law in the US and abroad support the fact that Monsanto has ownership of the descendants of those seeds. Even if the descendants are unwillingly created through the natural process of pollination, two cases in particular two cases in particular shape the current legal status of that ownership. One in which a farmer who agreed to Monsanto's terms tried unsuccessfully to find a legal way to invalidate his obligation in the contract he entered into with Monsanto, and in another in which organic farmers concerned about the possibility that Monsanto might attack them financially if their crops were contaminated by Monsanto unsuccessfully asked the courts to protect them from that risk. The policy. In the case of the farmer held that his obligation to recognize Monsanto's control of the crop grown from their seeds ended the moment he sold the seeds to someone else. The farmer sold, then purchased the seeds back, and then replanted the seeds, which he had promised not to do in the contract. The courts not only found that the farmer who had entered the contract with Monsanto couldn't plant the seeds, The court further indicated that even the people who have not entered into a contract with Monsanto can be sued by Monsanto for planting seeds purchased from a third party. Since Monsanto's patented seed makes up more than 90% of all crops, it makes it almost impossible to plant any seeds which are not owned by Monsanto. The case of the organic farmers went even further. In that case, the farmers were worried about the threat of lawsuit from Monsanto if their fields were contaminated by Monsanto. In the ruling, the court said that because Monsanto had conditionally promised not to sue the victims of contamination, the court would not give a ruling. Because there is no legal precedent preventing Monsanto from retracting the promise, the danger is still very real. The issues of ownership. Looking through the lens of deontology, the case of the farmer who promised not to replant the seed and then did so is fairly easy to categorize as unethical. Most rule-based frameworks have a foundation of keeping promises which are made in good faith. The farmer, in this case, clearly did not meet that. But there are other further implications. While a farmer selling grain and then buying it back to replant it is unusual, it is not unusual for farmers to buy grain from silos for late season planting. And the legal decision harms that tradition since it's difficult, if not impossible, to find a source for that planting which would not be significantly composed of seeds Monsanto has the legal claim to do. Deontology would also support the organic farmers. The idea of ownership being taken away without consent violates most rules frameworks, but the legal system is famously blind. The core principles of law is that legislatures are responsible for deciding the ethics of law. In contrast, the courts should interpret the law strictly based on the rules and precedent. The reality that Monsanto could legally contaminate the field of farmer and then sue their own victims remains, and deontology would not support that. These are the slides of the research and citation and reference list that Tom created to show all the stuff we use to be able to for our articles. This is a little bit more. And that was the end of our slide in our presentation.